4 minutes.
I am running to grab some water.
Do you know, are all of these going to be online? Do you know?
What's that?
Are these all going to be online? Do you
They're all going to be online. All this session, I don't know about every other room. This room is. This is the economic democracy.
Okay.
And that'll all be online.
Okay, thank you.
I know the other ones will be.
Does that sound like a waste of time? Take care of the last one was environment. Why we were in
Where does Gar leave? I need to.
Maryland. DC, Maryland.
Need to sit with him days trying.
It's very talented, huh? Let me get this one started. Okay, folks, we're going to get started. I think what we're talking about now is one of the bigger issues, especially for our students, which is debt. And why are we in debt, and what are our real debts to each other, and how we get out of this situation. Thomas Skecki is a academic activist. He switches time between Syracuse, where he was teaching, and now I'm not sure if that's still continuing, and he's working on a PhD from Switzerland, and lives in Tennessee. So he's a very jet-set life for a guy with lots of student debt. And he's involved in all sorts of interesting things like the Strike Debt Project, and also the Debtor's Manual, and also setting up debtor unions. So I think this is really an important discussion of changing the economy. So welcome, Thomas.
I want to especially thank Kevin and Margaret for all the work they put into this, for inviting me and for making it possible for me to come. So I've been working with a group called Strike Debt for the last couple of years. Well, last year and a half, really. It's an offshoot of Occupy Wall Street. So one thing we discovered in the park, those of us who were meeting face to face, was that we were all in debt. And in fact, many of us, this was sort of the most pressing individual concerns that we had. And for some of us, it was that we were in underwater mortgages. And we're just giving the bank free money, more than the value of our house. For a lot of us, it was medical debt, just freak accident, and you have a $10,000 bill that you can't pay. For some of us, it was credit card debt and payday loans. For a lot of us, it was tuition debt. And there are even more kinds of debt out there. You know, if you just have one and it's manageable, that's okay. But when you start having multiple ones, there are people who have just multiple kinds of debt. And after May Day 2012, you know, Occupy was sort of trying to figure out what to do after the eviction, and May Day was this big focal point. And there was just, I don't know how it happened, but there was just this mood that there was a general strike called, and after May Day, somehow, by some magical force, the occupation would gel and there would be a clear vision forward. When that didn't happen, groups started holding thematic assemblies in Washington Square Park in New York, an assembly on the environment, and people who were working on the Keystone Pipeline showed up. We had one, I don't remember what some of the other themes, but then there was a theme on debt, and suddenly tons and tons of people came. So we just kept having thematic assemblies on debt. And part of what we did was just, it was almost like an AA meeting. We just talked about how debt functioned in our lives. And for many people, this was a huge breakthrough. There's a tremendous amount of shame associated with debt, that we're led to believe that if you're in debt, it's your own fault. If you're in debt, it's because somehow you're living beyond your means, or you don't know how to manage your money, or you're somehow irresponsible, or you made some mistakes, and it's your fault. And the argument I'm going to present here, or the discussion that I want this to go sort of half and half discussion and presentation. So if you want to interrupt me, just feel free. But the argument I want to present is that we are not in debt because of our own choices. That we are in debt because of structural, there's a system that requires you, most of us, most of the 99%, to be in debt. So just speaking openly about it was deeply emotional for a number of people. There was a guy named Chris Casper who wrote a beautiful short piece in Yes magazine about just the experience of talking openly about his tuition debt, his medical debt, his credit card debt. He sort of had the trifecta. So the way that I look at it is, you know, in 2011, we just found our public spaces and occupied them. Madison, Wisconsin taught us how to do that. And simply taking up space became an act of direct resistance, one that I still don't quite understand why, but it was deeply threatening to those who had power. It took them a while to figure out how to respond, and the response was violent military-style evictions. Let's just pretend that you don't have the right to peacefully assemble or free speech. And for me, focusing on debt is a really obvious strategic maneuver, right? Debt is the place where our lives cooperate with Wall Street. It's the intersection between Wall Street and our lives. And that gives it a tremendous amount of potential for resistance. You know, I'm coming at this from sort of a classic Gandhian perspective, right? That if you just focus on the ways that you're cooperating with the systems that are oppressing you and find ways to refuse to cooperate, the people have tremendous amounts of power, right? So this is one of the questions that I want to pose to you is, what does non-cooperation look like? In short, debt is the way that Wall Street occupies our lives. And I'm interested in innovating new ways to evict Wall Street. Right? They evicted us. Now it's our turn to evict them. Yes?
Well, you know, just to add to your point, not only has debt become culturally ingrained and, you know, part of our system, but it's also got a privileged status within the system. For instance, if you go to Lowe's, if you've got a credit card at Lowe's or Home Depot or Walmart or any of these places, I shouldn't have known if I could shop at these, but no less, if I pay all cash, I get no discount. If I use my Lowe's credit card, which is backed by GE Capital, I get a 5% discount or a 6-month grace period, 0 interest grace period. Similarly, under the tax code, if I borrow money to fund something, I get a tax deduction. But if I use cash equity, I get nothing.
Yep.
So the entire system is biased to get you, especially if you're reliant. You know, the poor people who have to use credit cards, the system is biased to get them to use credit cards more and more. And then I won't even get into interest rates on purchases. The way most of these people are paying 25 to 32% interest, and then they take zero financing for 6 months. And if they miss by 1 day, 1 penny of that payment, they go back and retroactively take all of the money and amortize it over the period. Charge them interest at 29 to 32% for the entire duration of the free interest period, whether it's 6 months, 9 months, a year. So the more I study this stuff and experience it myself, the more I realize that the system is, usury. What is usury anymore? I mean, it's completely gone from our lexicon and vocabulary.
Yeah, the credit card companies, they really only make money off of you if you're carrying a rollover balance or if you miss a payment. And so it's a small fraction of the credit card holders are making the bulk, and they've geared everything about the way that credit cards work or the way they market them to sort of maximize those people in vulnerable situations. Demos, who some of you might know, fantastic, wonky, I don't know what would be called, a think tank, a policy sweatshop, I don't know. They're very, very smart. And they have a fantastic report about how credit card debt works. And it's simply called the plastic safety net. We've removed a social safety net. So when you find yourself surprisingly out of work, well, if you have some savings, those savings will disappear pretty quickly. And then the safety net that you have to turn to is credit cards. It's plastic. So I think the other reason why I'm so excited to focus on debt as a site of resistance is that there's a lot of, we're at a really, really interesting moment in time when it comes to the labor movement, right? I mean, in some ways, it's at a historical low. 11% of workers are in unions and roughly half of those are public unions. So in private industry, it's somewhere around 6% workers are in unions. It seems like things couldn't get worse. You know, every time it seems that way, it somehow becomes worse. Yet at the same time, there are all of these completely new ways of organizing workers. And it looks like the future of unions is going to be organizing low-wage workers, minimum wage workers, Walmart workers, fast food workers. Sometimes when strike debt is criticized in friendly ways by our allies, they say, really, you know, why are you focusing on debt? You should be focusing on labor. I would like to argue that the debt movement is a labor movement, that this should be considered one of these new forms of the labor movement, an innovative, fertile ground. Debt is wage theft of future labor. So if you're focusing on debt, you're focusing on labor. So I just want to give you like a very, very brief introduction to what we've done, and then I want to pose a few sort of big, unanswerable questions to you that, you know, technically have answers. So our website there is strikedebt.org. I think that, well, I'll come back to this. The main question that I think strike debt is posing to itself and to others is what debts do we owe? Really, what debts do we really owe? Not what debts do the 1% think we owe, but what debts do we truly owe? So here is our website. If there's only one thing that you take away from this little workshop, I hope it's that you visit strikedebt.org and download a free PDF, The Debt Resistors Operations Manual. I wish I had physical copies to give you. We've raised some money and printed over $10,000 of physical copies that we've been giving away for free. We're currently out of physical copies. This is my only one, it's the one that I've marked up. But there's nothing else like this. This is financial literacy that is radicalizing. You can find, there's a lot of bad financial literacy stuff. There's a lot of scam stuff out there. But you can find good financial literacy stuff. But what's unique about this is it doesn't just explain how debt functions and analyze how debt works. Strike Debt, we realized if we're going to resist, we really have to figure out how it works. Like on the nitty-gritty level, how does this actually work? But it's also a survival guide. How can you protect yourself under the current system? Really practical stuff. And then it's the beginnings of how do we start to fight back. So it's short, it's sexy, there's lots of sexy graphs and numbers and statistics. And if you listen to it backwards, there's a secret message. So download Debt Resistors Operation Manual. It's one of the things that we've done that I think we're most proud of. We're working on a second edition, which should be coming out in the winter at some point. Another project that we've done, sort of one of the projects I've been more involved in, is called the Rolling Jubilee. Is everyone familiar with this term, a jubilee? It's, historically, it's when all those who are in bondage are set free, including the bondage to debt. Debts are just canceled, they're wiped out. So one thing that most people don't know, it's just, how would you know? It's hidden, it's this invisible side to our economy. Credit card companies, banks, payday lenders, even hospitals will sell debt to investors. Most people know that there's some really complicated, shady stuff going on with mortgages, but they don't know that it's happening on these sort of smaller scale debts. And when they sell them to investors, that's really all they are. They're investors, buy low, sell high. So they treat this debt like a commodity, and they'll swap it back and forth with each other. They'll slice it up and repackage it and sell it. And what they're investing in is basically the collection process. At some point, one of these investors will hire debt collectors and shake people down for as much as they possibly can. It's immensely profitable as an industry. I mean, crazy, crazy profits. I wish I had swiped the slide of, Forbes saying this is one of the growth industries. Put all your money into these companies that are buying debt. And it makes sense because if you have a $100 credit card bill that you can't pay and it's gone to collection, when they sell it to a debt collector, they might sell that debt for $5. And that debt collector, they might not find you. You've gone into hiding. It's hard to find some of these people. Or maybe they found you and you can't pay, but you can only cough up like $20. Well, $20 is still a huge profit margin if they only paid $5 to buy it. Right? So these investors, they'll buy a whole portfolio of debt and they will work it. That's what they call it. They work the debt. They collect it until they've made their profit margin, and then they sell it downstream. And they keep selling it again and again and again. And there's regulations for the debt collection industry. Those regulations are very, very poorly enforced. The investor side of that, the debt buying and debt selling, it's the Wild West. Crazy, crazy stuff goes on that I'll get into in detail in a little bit. So this was an idea that was just kind of floating around Zuccotti Park in the first couple months. And I ran into the idea and I thought, this is brilliant. We should actually do this. And people said, yeah, okay, why don't you do it? So because I don't live in New York, this sort of became my way to feel like I was a part of the movement, was to research how to do this. We launched last November. We have raised over $600,000 through small donations off the internet. And we are now going out and purchasing debt at these bargain basement prices and wiping it out. So a few months ago, we spent just $20,000 of what we raised. And we purchased $1.1 million worth of medical bills in Louisville, Kentucky. So over 1,000 people's medical bills that they could not pay, that they were on the hook for, that had already, in this particular case, it had just recently been sold to a debt collector who was about to start making phone calls and collecting as much of it as they could. Now, most doctors, this is the part of the business they don't like. Nobody went to med school to become a debt collector. So we worked with them to just reverse that process. Have the debt collectors transfer it back over to the doctors, and then we'll pay the same amount the debt collectors did, and we'll wipe it out. So we're literally keeping more money in the hands of debtors who need it. They can't pay their bills. They need this money. And we're literally keeping money out of the hands of debt collectors and these investors who traded it. So $1.1 million of medical bills gone. Since that time, we have purchased debt that completely dwarfs that. We haven't announced it yet, so keep your ears peeled, because in the next 6 months, we're going to try to, we're going to try to get the most bang for our buck from this. The Rolling Jubilee is really, it's designed to be sort of a spotlight, to shine light on these the shady ways that debt works. And I'd like to list some of these because maybe you can help us figure out how to shine a light on it.
On your buying debt in the secondary market, and the third market, the fourth area, I just think a lot of that debt is fraudulent. I don't know how much of the debt that you bought, but the hospital billing system today, I have friends that are doctors, and I personally had an appendectomy at NYU Hospital in New York. And I got a bill about a year later, after all the insurance bills, the whole billing system, you got to be a rocket scientist. No one can understand it. The hospitals outsource all of that. They don't want you to talk to them directly. There's so many players, but I'm convinced that half of the bills that came to my house, which I still haven't paid, are fraudulent. And what it is people that have sold, I think they buy the paper from whoever they buy. I don't know, you know a lot more about it. And when you use the words sell downstream, I have no idea what that means. I mean, for me, I have a whole idea of what I think it could mean, but I don't know how you used it. But I really believe that a good portion of the debt that's out there in the commodity market is fraudulent, that it's created because of the fraud in the medical billing system by hucksters that are out there, that are sending these bills out to people, alleging to be a player in the system who performs services. Mm-hmm. And if you have an appendectomy and you're out, you have no idea what happens, why you're put out, and then you get up and you go away, and then all of a sudden you start getting this barrage of bills. And I was insured, so I didn't have to worry about paying them myself. But how would you ever know whether those bills were for services that were performed or weren't?
Right. And we'll get into this in some detail, and we should clarify what we mean by fraudulent here. It's not like there's some bureaucrat who's just like making up a debt and like chasing someone down. When it comes to the medical bills, just the medical billing process is so confusing. A lot of it, it's not that there's any malice involved. It's just there's mistakes. The doctors make mistakes. The billing and receiving arm makes mistakes. The patients are just confused by it and attempt to pay their bill in good faith, but don't realize that they missed one or something like that. So one of the things that happened when we abolished this debt in Kentucky is there was a newspaper reporter named Jerry Downs, gives me lots of faith in local reporting. She followed the money, she tracked it down, and she found out that, yes indeed, some of these bills never should have gone to collection in the first place. They were mistakes that the billing department made. That's part of what I see the Rolling Jubilee doing, is sort of shining a light on just how screwed up the whole system.
Well, I would take it a step further and say the system is intentionally designed to be that way. Mm-hmm. Yep. And I can give you lots of examples where I've seen it in action.
Yep, and it's even worse when we move out of medical debt. I'll come to that in a second. But
just to add a little bit more smoke to the fire, I'm a retired surgeon, and was managing partner of a rather large group and so on, and so had a chance to see at least as much of this side of things as most of us in practice see. First of all, if you go for an appendix or an arthroscopy or whatever, something like 90% of your bill is hospital bill, and it's absolutely opaque to us, even when we,
No, I know.
even when we were trying to figure out when we built the little operating room in our office, what are the prices out there? It's illegal. We could go to jail for that. Secondly, so the docs actually have very little control over any of this stuff. It's hospital, and it's just as confusing to us as it is to you, believe me. And we're actually incredibly controlled. If we and we don't actually know dollars and cents attached to anything we do. We know code, and code comes out of a book. And if we overcode by $10 for something, we're subject for each one of those to something like a $10,000 fine. It's draconian, even if it's in good faith, it's just an error. So, so there's a distinction there. But you're right. It is incredibly confusing, and my belief is it is intentional. So.
Mine is for sure.
And unfortunately, the Affordable Care Act doesn't really solve this problem of, of the bullshit. You're saying that because you think it does solve it?
No.
Yes.
He didn't say, he just sneezed.
I'm director for a nonprofit on economic justice, and we deal with all kinds of unsecured and secured debt. And here you're talking about unsecured debt and helping people wipe it out. So I'm excited to learn some ideas from you that I can take back to Oregon. But I can tell you in the real estate arena, the junk fees and the issues of, like, for example, if a family will send in their bank card payment on time, the banks will hold it till it's a day late so they can go back. I mean, and we document this through research, and we bust them. And the rules for, and I'm sure I'm excited you have this book because we're working on one. Now I don't have to. I can just link to your website. You know, we like that. But in real estate, for example, if you're delinquent, they send somebody to drive by your house every day all over America if you're delinquent. Every month you get a drive-by. And you can get billed anywhere from $200 to $500 just to be checked on to see if you're still there. And they pay the drive-by person $5. These junk fees are off the chart. So to try and clean it up and mop it up is ridiculous. So we go in there and just look at stripping it all off, cramming it way down.
Let's
So could
contact information.
Could a nonprofit in Oregon do what you did and buy a bunch of Oregon debt?
I don't know.
I think we can. I'm very excited about this concept.
I mean, you can't just buy a particular person's debt.
Right.
You got to buy a bunch of debt.
You gotta buy a block of debt.
I should clarify. Yeah, when we buy the debt, it's all of the information is anonymized. So we're buying a portfolio. We know what type of debt it is. Sometimes we might know what region it's from. It's only after we close on that contract do we get the personal information. And that's another scandal. They're not just selling us like the name of the person and how to get in contact with them. They're selling people's social security numbers. If you want to buy a social security number, get into the debt buying. I mean, I shouldn't say that, but and there are no controls, none on the. It's the Wild West on the investing side of things. But we've got a lot of money. And the only thing that we can do with it is to buy debt with it. So I'd like to trade contact information. And I don't know if there's anything we can do together, but it might be.
Well, I think there is, knowing what we're working on. And I followed your work a little bit. So
I would recommend that you watch the documentary Maxed Out.
That is a great documentary. I've seen it, and I second that recommendation. Everyone should watch it. There's a great interview with debt buyers where they're comparing themselves to an online dating site. Oh yeah, what we're really doing is matching investors with credit card companies, and but this is a piece of somebody's life that's being sold. This is a piece of someone's misery, and these investors, they're not creating a valuable product that they're taking to the market. They're not providing a valuable service. Their whole business model is to make money off of other people's basic needs: healthcare, housing, education. 42% of all credit card debt goes to basic needs, covering rent, utility bills, medical bills. putting food on the table, 42%. We have this myth that people with credit card debt got credit card debt because they were buying flat screen TVs that they couldn't afford. It's just a myth. That's it. There's no factual basis to it. So there's so many injustices, it's hard to know how to get to them. One of the groups that is just my heroes and heroines, they used to be called NEDAP. They are now called the New Economy Project in New York. They are brilliant. They're fantastic. If you ever get a chance to support what they do, take it. They did a full in-depth study into how this debt buying market works, specifically in New York City. This is another issue. There's a patchwork of laws, so it happens slightly differently in each location, but New York is by no means abnormal. It happens this way in many places. Here's how debt buyers make their money, and they only followed, I think, the 10 largest debt buyers out of a market that's got hundreds of them. The 10 largest sucked $1.1 billion in a 2-year period from the poorest members of our society. When we talk about the 99% and the 1%, this debt buying industry is like a sump pump that redistributes wealth upwards. And here's how they do it. They buy people's credit card bills, for example. And then they take them to court in the state of New York. And they use servicers, right? People who are supposed to deliver subpoenas so that you know, oh, you're being sued. You need to come up, you need to show up to court. They're deliberately using servicers that have a reputation for sewer service, where the subpoena gets sort of lost in the mail, or it somehow never gets to the person it's supposed to get to. So when the court shows up, right, when the debt buyer, who has a team of attorneys, show up, and they're bringing 1 million accounts to court, there might be 2 or 3 debtors who got the message that they're being sued and show up. For everyone else, the judge doesn't review the facts, doesn't review whether this debt is legitimate, whether it was legitimately bought or not. Here's one trick that the debt buyers use on the Wild West debt market. Let's say I buy debt directly from Chase credit cards. I could sell it to 5 of you and not tell the other 4, that not tell you that I've sold it to 4 other people, the same account. So now you're all hiring debt collectors, collecting on that same account. Those debt collectors are all making reports to the credit reporting agencies that this debt is not in repayment, that's affecting that person's credit score. So even if they pay the first debt collector who calls, there will be 4 other debt collectors who are calling to collect the same debt.
Wow.
Right? So if the debt buyers are forced to prove it in court, almost always they can't. Right? But the debtors aren't showing up to court. Those who do, only 1% of the debtors who show up to court have legal representation. 70% of the people these debt buyers are taking to court are Black or Latino. And 71% of them are improperly served, 95% from low or moderate incomes. This is a clear violation of not just the US Constitution, but the New York State Constitution. You are entitled to due process. They can't just, this is a systematic violation of people's rights. When you don't show up to court, the judge doesn't review the facts, they just make a default judgment on behalf of the debt buyer. Now the state becomes the debt collector. They dock your wages. That's how the debt buyers, that's how these investors are making their wages. So the first time you learn that there's a bill that has slipped through the cracks or that has gone to court is when your HR department sends you a notice that they're going to start docking your wages 20% until that debt is paid. So New Economy Project meticulously studied these cases and found that 35% of them were clearly meritless. These are fraudulent debts. They're not even legal in the eyes of the state if the state would bother to look at it, but they're not even looking at it. this is not just happening in New York City, it's happening everywhere. So one thing that I really want to highlight is the racism that is built into this system. One of the clearest ways to see this racism at work is in credit reports, right? When you apply for an apartment, when you apply for a job, a lot of these employers are running a credit check. Now, many of you have read The New Jim Crow, right? Probably the most important book written about the United States in the 21st century. You could write an appendix about the new Jim Crow when it comes to debt, right? It is illegal in this country to discriminate in the hiring process or in housing based on the color of someone's skin. But it's still 100% legal to discriminate people on their credit score the same way people used to discriminate on the color of their skin. And it just so happens that we've rigged the system so that people who look like me, have blonde hair and blue eyes and light-colored skin, have much better credit scores than people who have dark skin. So there's no rules that say you have to use the credit score in the hiring process. So if an employer is interviewing 10 candidates and they're all qualified, but they want to hire the white one for whatever reason, they can just, and the white candidate has, modest credit scores or terrible credit, they can just ignore the credit score for the hiring process there. You have a black candidate who's qualified but has only modest credit. Well, this gives you a cover. You can say, well, we didn't hire you, it was because of your credit score. Same thing with housing. I mean, housing, we could go on and on and on. And I don't even know as much about in housing, but this is a deeply racist system. So I would say a debtors movement absolutely has to be an anti-racist movement. Now this isn't just going on the small scale credit card bills, medical bills. It's happening on a much, much grander scale on Wall Street. Right? That is Paul Singer. I keep calling him Peter Singer, but they're two very different people. That's Paul Singer. Paul Singer makes his money by buying sovereign debt from the third world. Recently, Argentina, which has a large amount of debt that it owes all kinds of creditors, settled its debt in court for like 10 cents on the dollar. They agreed to pay 10 cents of this debt that they were put in. Paul Singer runs a hedge fund that owns a portion of Argentina's debt. And they said, that's not good enough. We're not going to settle. We're going to take this to court. And a judge in New York City said, yep, Argentina owes Paul Singer's hedge fund the full amount. And they started repossessing, like literally they repossessed a battleship that Argentina had that was off the coast of Africa. And they seized it and said, okay, we're selling this to settle this debt. Paul Singer makes his money, quite literally, this isn't hyperbole, there's no exaggeration at all. Literally, people will die in Argentina to pay Paul Singer's hedge fund. People will not get health care because the money that would go to that health care is going to this hedge fund. People will not get an education because it's going to Wall Street. People will not get food because that money is going to Wall Street. People will die so that this man and the people he represents can make profit. Now the critique that Strike Debt is making is not just a critique against capitalism or a critique against corporations or against Wall Street. It is also a critique of the state. Can anyone guess, or does anyone know, the other half of Paul Singer's business?
Not yet.
He runs the second largest super PAC. He spent more money than any other super PAC in the last election cycle, supporting Mitt Romney and Republican candidates across the board. Money that is literally being taken out of the hands of people in Argentina who need it very badly is going directly to craft legislation in our country. Right? So we're constantly told that we have only two options. Either we need to increase the power of the state in order to regulate private industry, but then that's creepy. The state abuses its power and it becomes a police state. Or we need to increase the power of private industry so that it can act as a corrective to the abusive power of the state. And the critique that StrikeDebt and Occupy Wall Street are making is that really these two sides are one and the same. The 1% isn't just Wall Street. The 1% is the state. Right?
Yes, that's not only true in America. If you look at China, I mean, all of large corporations in the state, in Russia, China, you look at the Middle East, all these petrostates, they're all one. So to even think in terms of the state as being separate from business in today's world is crazy. I mean, they've been taken over.
Global capital.
Driving up here today, I was listening to the radio, and they were talking about forfeiture laws and how it affects the poor people more because they can forfeit if they owe something or they don't have due process. And I guess there's an article in this week's New Yorker magazine on it.
I have experience in Washington, D.C. And you sue somebody for money, you must serve them personally, the process server, so that they know that they have to show up in court on a specific date and that they owe so much money. That's in contrast to what they're saying about people not being served and going to court.
Yep, so it's a patchwork of laws. So I don't know the specifics of the laws in Washington, D.C.
It's true in most jurisdictions in this country. When you
It's
sue somebody for money, you gotta let them know.
well, that's the law. That's the same law in New York City. The problem is that they're not following the law, and it's not being
The
enforced.
judges are not doing their job.
Yep, and the judges are at fault here. And because this landscape is uneven with the different jurisdictions, debt buyers, as investors, specifically look at places where the laws are weakest. They look at places where they can turn the court system into a paper mill, into a collection agency. And of course, it's taxpayers who are footing the bill when that collection process goes into place, where they're contacting businesses to dock wages. That's all being funded by the rest of us. So there's a lot more like analysis stuff that we can do, but I'd like to pause and just pose sort of like the deep philosophical question that we're probably not all going to answer in the same way. This is the Democracy Conference. If we had a truly democratic society, what would our true obligations be to one another? That's all a debt is, right? A debt is a kind of social bond. A debt is an obligation. So, I've met a few of you before, but most of you are perfect strangers, right? I've never met you at all. Most of you have never met me. Do we have any bond at all? Do we have any obligation to one another? And if so, what is it?
Living in a society, we should look out for other people. We've gotten to a point where looking out for other people is a no-no. It's an all, give me, you don't have.
It's part of the preamble to the Constitution.
Screw the
Promote the
neighbor.
general welfare.
So what does that mean specifically? What does looking out for each other entail?
You have to help them get work if they need work. You have to help them if they are sick. You have to, because it's a give and take. You owe them and they'll owe you. It
So-
works in primitive societies, why can't it work here anymore?
So I heard two really concrete things there, right? If you get sick, or if tonight, God forbid, you get hurt in an accident, right? You should not be forced into bankruptcy or into poverty or into debt to get the medical care that you need. I think this is how I answer the question, part of it. One of my obligations to you is that you should get the health care that you need. Now, if you need plastic surgery to change the shape of your nose, maybe you can do that on your own. But if you need a kidney transplant, that's part of my obligation to you. The other thing I heard was, all of us are intelligent, capable people who have different skills and different experiences. Many of us are unemployed right now. I'm technically speaking, I'm unemployed, but fingers crossed, got some applications in the works. I don't know if you heard any of Gar's talks earlier today, but our system is highly inefficient because so many of us are unemployed. There's much, much better things for you to be doing than just being unemployed or applying to minimum wage work. Is that it? Are our only obligations healthcare and employment, or are there any other obligations people would like to throw on the table?
I have made my obligation to educate people on critical issues, and start the dialogue, and I do a social forum collective through it's oureconomy.us, the Colorado chapter every month, and I put everything on a table once a month. It was 5 people attending at the beginning, and now I have reached 72 people attending this social forum. And I think collectively, when you bring people to the table, then we can collectively come up with the solution that it goes well. Like for example, I feel a person like him should not exist. I think, but I cannot go to war with him. But collectively, we can come up with some sort of a thing, not to buy his hedge funds, not to participate in some of the things he does, trying to go and, confront him and something like that. But I cannot do it by myself, but we can do it collectively.
Right. But certainly he has a right to exist, right? He should just be doing something productive, like being a farmer or something.
Yes.
Something positive.
Yeah.
Well, the devil's in the details, but I think everybody has a right to some level of dignity. It's hard to figure out exactly what the details of that would be.
Right, but to flesh that out a little bit, I would say part of dignity is having a place to live.
Yes.
I don't need to live in a mansion, but I need a roof over my head. And to live in a dignified way, I shouldn't be living near a toxic waste dump. And one of the things that, I read this in an environmental psychology study, and now I see it everywhere. You can tell someone's economic class by how loud their living situation is. If you're in a place where there's constant noise that you can't control, you can't turn off, I mean, if you're listening to the rock and roll music loud, but you can turn it off, that's one thing. But if you're next to the train tracks, or if your walls are thin and your neighbors are loud and you can't, if you have money, you can move. The wealthier you are, the more peace and quiet you get. And after a while, that just starts grating on your psychology. So I think some kind of dignified living situation. It doesn't have to be a mansion for everybody, but affordable housing. What about education? Do we have any obligations to each other in terms of education?
Certainly. In Europe and the Scandinavian countries, some of those countries, you get free education all the way up to PhD.
So,
we're privatizing our education. We're paying some professors, some administrators too much money. Way more than they should be. They should be paid, frankly. I mean, we have respect and admiration for people who go in the teaching profession, but some of these salaries are ridiculous. The other thing, if I can switch to another subject, is the health care. If you read article in Time magazine, March 4th, 2013, they point out the outrageous prices that the hospitals charge for the materials and their services. It's just ridiculous, and that's why with the 50% or more of the bankruptcies in this country are due to somebody in the family getting a serious illness, and the price is $150,000, $500,000 to take care of it. It's wrong. People without insurance go bankrupt.
Even people with
People with
insurance.
insurance.
Yeah, people with-
With a minor illness.
Right.
Even with a minor illness
That's
and
what Obamacare
insurance.
is trying to take care of.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
So
They'll make it worse.
62% of all bankruptcies in the United States have medical bills as a contributing factor.
Yeah.
And, you know, Obamacare, it solves the access issue, right? There'll be people, you know, when Obamacare passed, I felt conflicted about it, but for a while, briefly, I allowed myself to feel happy about it. Because I didn't have health insurance, and Obamacare would make affordable health insurance available. The trouble is, just because you have health insurance doesn't mean that health insurance will cover your medical bills. So it doesn't solve the medical debt issue.
That's what they're trying to cover.
Cover all the things you don't
Very
need.
comprehensive.
Not true.
You won't they won't turn you down if you have acne, you know, previous condition, or they turn down battered women because they had a previous, you know, the insurance companies, the health insurance companies, the CEOs and other executives, multi-million dollars a year, and they turn down people for reasons like I suggested. Obamacare is trying to correct that.
Not really.
Not really.
In the long run, and hopefully will develop competition between the health insurance companies who are now,
Oh, please.
they divvy up the spoils.
So if I need an organ transplant or something that's going to cost a ton of money, what's nice is that now I won't be denied that care if I have a pre-existing condition or something like that. But I'm still going to get a bill.
The point is, the insurance companies, part of Obamacare is 80% of the premium have to be spent on medical care, not on the executives. There are a number of issues, and people are misinformed by the Obamacare. People don't look into it.
Right. I mean, it solves some issues, but it's
the hospitals charge too much money.
Right.
For instance, when you go to the hospital, they usually hydrate you with this little bag of saline solution.
Mm-hmm.
You can buy it online for $5, $5 and change. Hospitals charge you much, $84 for that bag. In other words, the price has nothing to do with the cost.
Mm-hmm. And I've actually got some more on that.
It's not cost but 50%. It's cost but 500%.
Actually, you know, I am a healthcare activist and I've been for a long time, and I'm a single payer. Now I have problem because people think that their healthcare issues are solved by Obamacare.
Yep.
You know, we're still dealing with the, you know, old goddamn insurance companies who are working for profit, and they are going to use every corner of that to try to ruin whatever Obama has, you know, proposed. So we are still dealing with the same people. We are not.
Actually, when it comes to debt, Obamacare is going to make it worse. Because what Obamacare will only subsidize are the so-called silver plans, where the insurance company pays 70% of the cost of health care, but the consumer is left with 30% of the cost. They don't cover the 90%, 10%, 80-20. They only provide subsidy to the silver plans. That means we're going to have people with insurance, but insufficient insurance.
Mm-hmm.
I expect bankruptcies from healthcare to go up under Obama. And I don't see competition going up. In Maryland, for example, we just had one of the larger, I see you throw your hands down because you don't want to, I see you throw your hands down, but I've studied this issue a lot. And most of what you said was inaccurate. In the exchanges, for example, that's how you're supposed to get the competition. In Maryland, only one company is going to be in the exchange. And that's true across the country because it's a very monopolized system. And most of the companies are saying, I'm not going to bother going to the exchange. I'm just going to leave that state and go somewhere else. So you're not going to get the competition you're thinking you're going to get. You're going to have less and less people covered through their employer. So people are forced an individual market, which will be more expensive. And so they're going to get more expensive insurance, less coverage, more debt. It's a mess. Obama did not face up to the problem, which is the insurance industry. He chickened out. They gave him $20 million. He sold us out for $20 million, and he screwed us. And that's what Obamacare really is. I didn't want to get into that, but you said so much that was false. I had to say something.
Well,
Can we get on to the rest of your, can we hear the rest of your lecture? And go to a workshop on healthcare?
Yeah.
Well, this is debt. This is healthcare debt. That's why I mentioned it.
Okay, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a basic underlying point that I'm trying to make with this, and that is that we have the wealth to meet our true obligations to each other. We can make sure that everyone gets the health care that they need. In fact, Physicians for a National Healthcare Program did the numbers and found out if we move to a truly democratic healthcare system, small d democracy, where we all sort of say we are bound to one another, we are obligated, we're indebted to one another to make sure that everybody gets the healthcare they need. We, as the 300+ million people in the United States, would save every single year $400 billion. That's a lot of money. Did I get that number right?
That's right.
Even if we just switch to a public option, we would save $68 billion over the course of 10 years. So that's a huge tax that we're paying, a $400 billion chunk of wealth that is going from us up to the privatized healthcare system. And what are we getting for it? Are we getting better healthcare?
No.
Are we getting cheaper healthcare?
No.
So the same is true for education, right? It's actually, now there's been a lot of great research on what single-payer healthcare looks like. There's detailed policy proposals if you're interested in it. We can cite the statistics and the numbers. That type of research is just getting going on higher education. But from what we know so far, it would cost roughly $15 billion a year to provide truly tuition-free higher education at every public school. $15 billion is nothing compared to the GDP. Just to put this in perspective, we spend $15 billion with a B every single year on the war on drugs. The Pentagon did an audit of itself in 2012. And according to the Pentagon, not according to peace activists, according to the Pentagon, they concluded they waste annually $72 billion every year. Elizabeth Warren and some friends of hers at Harvard found out that under the current system, where the Federal Reserve creates money and then lends it to too big to fail banks, they're lending it at an interest rate that is less than what fair market prices would dictate because there's an assumption that these too big to fail banks will get bailed out if they fail. That subsidy costs the taxpayers $82 billion every year. We're talking about a $15 billion a year investment every year.
They borrow half at 70, they borrow at less than 1%.
Yes, 0.75%, I think. If every single year, the 1%, both as individuals and as corporations, cheat us out of $250 billion worth of taxes. So we don't need to spend more money than we're already spending on education with tiny little common sense reforms. Nothing even controversial, nothing that, you explain this to the most rabid Tea Partier, and you explain it, using uncontroversial terms, they're going to support this. This is not controversial. It's extremely affordable to pay our true obligations to each other. We can't do it because all of our resources are going to pay illegitimate debts to the 1%. And this is what I'm really trying to nerd out on this. How can we resist these illegitimate debts? The argument I'm making is basically, again, classic Gandhian, Martin Luther King type stuff. Just as there are just laws and unjust laws, and the moral thing to do is to follow the just laws and deliberately disobey the unjust laws, I would say there are legitimate and illegitimate debts, and it's immoral for us to be paying these illegitimate debts. It's immoral for us to be cooperating. The only responsible thing to do, financially and socially, is to refuse to cooperate. But it's going to take some real creativity and real organization to effectively stop cooperating.
What about the importance of the commons and the tragedy of the commons, which is, I think, so misinterpreted, to human life? I mean, water, the privatization, just take any aspect of the commons. But Eleanor, what's her name, the woman that won the Nobel Peace Prize last year, she's not even an economist. And she talked about the tragedy of the commons and how if economists continue to privatize, and property jurists, basically the courts and the legislatures, continue to privatize all public, what traditionally has been the commons, water and
Yes.
fishing rights and whatever.
Air.
Yeah, air. I mean,
37 cents a minute.
so basically what we're doing through the courts and through capitalism is basically taking away the earth, and of which we are a part, and depend on to live, and our ability to survive as human beings.
You know, those of us who are working in strike debt, we get debt on the brain. We put on the debt goggles. And once you start looking at the world through debt, a lot of things become illuminated. There's been some people working with strike debt, Andrew Ross and Nick Mirzoff, two really brilliant scholars, who have started looking at climate change through the eyes of debt. We're basically building up a debt of CO2 that somebody else is going to have to pay, right? I gotta say, the baby boomer generation, they had everyone else pay for their higher education, right? That's why they got to graduate with modest levels of debt. Then they pulled up the ladder behind them for their kids. They pollute the universe, and now it's going to be their grandkids who have to pay that debt down.
There's a direct financial corollary to that also, which is which is the frequently nations in the South which owe money to the nations in the North, which then liquidate their natural resources, including the Amazon rainforest, for example, the lungs of the earth, in order to pay the debt that is owed to this guy. So that same mechanism is going on a purely financial level also.
Oh, yeah.
Well, look at Detroit. Detroit's selling off all of, an island.
Yeah.
Grosse Point, whatever it is up there, I don't even know. And that bankruptcy, if capitalists wins, the GO bondholders, who bought those bonds knowing full well that Detroit was in the tanks, if they supersede labor and pension rights, which I will argue all day that they will, that's going to be a barrage of 35 municipal bankruptcies that are all going to try to cancel their pension obligations to the benefit of the senior bondholders. I mean, Detroit is going to be a huge case with regard to.
That's a really good transition point. So I'll take one more question, and then I want to tee this next section up really well.
How can we implement something like Iceland? Just we don't pay, period.
Yeah.
I mean, so we can get rid of debts rather than going through all these loopholes that we are going, and we don't know if we get anywhere or not. How can we build a movement towards that?
I swear I did not plant these two questions. They're so perfectly geared for what I think one of the things that Strike Debt is doing a really good job on in terms of shifting how people think about debt is that there's this deep morality in, it's just in all of us, this idea that everybody has to pay their debts. In reality, only some people have to pay their debts. Just like taxes, it's only for the little people. There's a huge double standard, and it comes up both with the Icelandic example and Detroit. So this guy, you've probably never heard of him. He's one of the most influential businessmen in America. His name is Toby Mackenzie. He recently died, and although I don't like speaking ill of the dead, He's one of the most evil people who have ever lived.
He looks it.
Yes.
Toby McKenzie invented payday lending. Together with a guy named Alan Jones in Cleveland, Tennessee, about 20 miles from where I live right now. In Tennessee, you can borrow a payday loan and pay it back at an annual API of 458.25% interest. Now, here's the kicker. When Toby McKenzie died, he was bankrupt. He was bankrupt. He was going through the bankruptcy process to get all of his debts eliminated. He can do that. His business can do that. The people who owe money to him don't get the same deal. He is going to turn right around and take whatever he has to take to get the wealth out of them, right? And I also, when he died, the local press was all like, oh, we still live in a country where you can get rich. He has $1 million idea and he can make it. He ran a payday lending industry and went bankrupt. How bad of a businessman do you have to be to go bankrupt running a payday lending? I mean, this is like radical incompetence. Like, he's the poster child for incompetent business. Similar to Donald Trump. Donald Trump has been bankrupt many times. He's had tens of millions of dollars, maybe even more, I don't know the exact numbers, of his debt wiped out. The same deal, none of us are going to get that deal in bankruptcy court, especially after they rewrote the bankruptcy laws in 2005.
Thanks to Joe Biden.
A bill that was written by lobbyists for Visa and passed. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars pushing it through. This wasn't the first time they tried. It took them 10 years to get it passed. Rewriting the laws, making it really, really difficult for you to get credit card bills wiped out in bankruptcy. It's already impossible to get tuition debt wiped out in bankruptcy. Toby McKenzie's debt, gone. Donald Trump's debt, gone. Donald Trump, if you ever notice, his favorite insult, if he really, really hates somebody, his favorite insult is to call them a loser. It's very revealing. I think he's advertising what he would consider like his deepest fear, that he would be a loser. But honestly, he went bankrupt running a casino. How bad of a businessman do you have to be to go bankrupt? Literally rigged system where the house always wins. Where the house always wins, yet he lost. He is the world's biggest loser. But I don't want to pick on him. I mean, I like picking on people my own size, and it'd be hard finding a smaller individual than Donald Trump.
Okay, pick on him.
Are these intentional bankruptcies, do you think? I mean, do they know the game is rigged and they set it up, so, like Peabody Coal, the biggest coal company, set up a sham corporation to get rid of all their pensions.
Yep.
That the sham corporation goes bankrupt, the pensions are erased. I mean, how much of these guys are just playing this rigged system?
There is quite a bit of it.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. In the case of Donald Trump and Toby McKenzie, it's just pure business incompetence.
Really?
In the case, for example, of American Airlines, they did a strategic default, a strategic bankruptcy. A couple years ago, they just looked at the books and said, they had $400 billion, $400 billion in their bank account. They had all the money they needed to meet all of their obligations. But they decided they could make more money if they didn't have all this debt, and if they didn't have this contract that they legally agreed to with their workers. So they just filed for bankruptcy. The judge wiped out all their debt and tore up their contract with the union. They cut everyone's wages, laid off thousands of workers. Their investors made more money. Their bankruptcy law is not the same bankruptcy situation that you and I have available to us. So this idea that everybody has to pay their debts, I'm calling BS on it. Right?
Yes.
We have a moral obligation to resist illegitimate debts to people like Toby McKenzie.
Yeah, I want to mention a situation that we deal with in our organization. The biggest banks on Wall Street got busted a few dozen times recently. And one of them was the OCC bust, one of them is the 4950 Attorney General's bust, and they agreed to be nice to the people. And so they were going to forgive some debt for their bad behavior. So what happened is they systematically went out and figured out who they would forgive the debt. And many of our members, including my husband and I, got to be the lucky ones to get some debt forgiveness from them. They got 125% wipe off for forgiving that debt, and the tax liability got shifted to us. And my husband and I had to go file a bank. We had no other debt. We had to file a bankruptcy because we would have gotten a $30,000 tax bill on their forgiveness of debt. Now, it's a really sad state of affairs when Mark Thomas and Nancy Kerber in America, which are everyday people that, you know, were crushed in this situation, had to go file a bankruptcy for that kind of debt. And there are millions of Americans across America that don't even know this thing is kicking them yet because they haven't gotten the 1099-C yet. And they're still going out.
And they might not.
Pardon?
They might not.
They might not what?
They might not get the 1099-C.
Most of them are getting them. And sometimes they're 2 to 3 years before they see them. And people say, well, I'm not getting one. A year later, they call me, they go, I got it. My tax person says I'm not insolvent. Just because I'm broke doesn't mean I'm insolvent. And yeah, it's a real problem. And again, it's the shifting of liability from Wall Street, bad behaviors and profits onto the guy who's already been beat on the street. And
when they wrote that off, you said this, but I don't know if people heard it, they got a tax write-off.
For 125% of the debt.
So I didn't mention this, but when, you know, why are all these bankers selling debt on the secondary market? Part of it is a bank is legally required to after 80 days of non-payment. But they also, it's a tiny little bailout every time they create a bad debt, they sell it. This is one of the reasons, not the only one, but one of the reasons why Bank of America has not paid taxes in many years. There's, I think, 2 other big points I want to make before we finish up. This is Alan Schwartz. He was the CEO of Bear Stearns when it went under. He's had a 30-year career there, ended up the CEO. Bear Stearns went under, brought the whole system down. He got bailed out. He got bailed out in part by pensioners in Detroit. Right? He's now back with a hedge fund, an investment fund, Guggenheim Investments. They're one of the creditors that Detroit's on the hook to. Pensioners are going to get their pensions cut to pay him back. Again, second time in a row. He had his own debts wiped out by the rest of us. I mean, not him personally, but the companies he's worked for. Wall Street got their debts wiped out. You know, there's one of Jesus's parables, the parable of the unrepentant, the unforgiving servant. It's kind of a creepy parable, but the kingdom of heaven is like a rich man who needs to settle accounts with the king, and he's on the hook for millions of dollars. He comes in and he says, I can't pay. And the king says, oh, well, don't worry, I'll wipe that all out. Rich man turns around to a poor man who owes him a tiny debt and says, I'm going to sell your family into bondage to pay this debt. And somehow the kingdom of heaven is like punishing that guy. I don't quite understand the parable, but it's a perfect analogy for this kind of stuff. And then, so this is one of the big points. We're not in debt because we don't know how to manage our money. Most of us manage our money quite well, thank you. We're all going to make a few mistakes. We should be able to recover from those mistakes, but we're smart, competent people. We're not greedy. This is why we're in debt, and this is why I would say it's a structural problem, and a debt resistance movement that we need to build is a labor movement. It's a new form of labor movement.
Exactly.
That red line is productivity since World War II. That yellow line, that flat lines, sort of at the late 70s, is wages. Right? So even though we're working more, quite literally, just in terms of hours worked, we're working more, and we're much more efficient and effective for a whole host of reasons, technological development, all kinds of stuff. With my laptop, I can do in a couple days what used to take a whole team of people a month to do. That productivity that increased value is not being passed on to workers. Now, back in the years between World War II and the 1970s, it's not as if the 1% weren't siphoning off value, you know, classic Marxist surplus value stuff. It's just that things got exaggerated, exacerbated. What happened around 1980s? I mean,
Started outsourcing.
It was 1970s, it was earlier.
Inflation went up and the wages stayed the same.
yeah.
Deregulation.
A whole host of things, from deregulation to different, moving off the gold standard, not that we should return to the gold standard, but, you know.
Reduction in tax rates.
Reduction in tax rates.
I have this chart too, but what's missing on your chart is what the 1%, Scott, you have.
I'm not planting these people, it's not, I feel like.
Smart people.
So there's, now the red line is 1%. The green line is productivity, and the blue line is the rest of us. So we're working, and the 1% is literally stealing the value that we make. All right. Many of you have seen this, right? The sample budget put together by a financial advisor at Visa, right? A financial advisor at Visa. There's this logic that people who wind up in debt because they're financially irresponsible. They don't know how to make a budget. What we learned is that really it's the financial advisors at Visa who don't know how to make a budget. But compare this to CNN Money had actual McDonald's workers share their actual real-life budgets. One thing you can find is that they're much more responsible. They're actually spending money on food, for example, and heat. Seems like a very responsible financial decision to me. The other thing you'll notice, it's like that old, beautiful song, right? Another day older and deeper in debt. We are in debt because, not because we are spending beyond our means, but because we have removed the means to meet our basic needs ourselves, right? An illegitimate debt, as I would define it, maybe some of you would disagree, but my working definition of an illegitimate debt is a debt that you go into for your basic needs, right? If you want to buy a mansion and take out a mortgage, more power to you. But if you're just going into debt putting food on the table, there's something wrong with our society. Here's another example. Now, there are always going to be people who make irresponsible decisions and wind up in debt. Again, I like picking on people my own size. I don't want to be a bully, and Newt Gingrich is a small person. But you know, when you find people who live beyond their means, you're going to find them a lot more in the top 10% than you are in the bottom 90%. A real ad in the Boston area for a full-time minimum wage cashier at McDonald's, requiring 2 years of experience and a 4-year bachelor degree.
Oh. Right. Sick country.
Even Megan McArdle agrees, and she's wrong about everything. So, even with a college degree, we're seeing wages decrease. And the other major thing that you're going to see is a huge gender gap still. Debt resistance doesn't just need to be anti-racist, it needs to be anti-patriarchy. I mean, this is one of the things that's so difficult, I feel, about organizing, is that white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy all reinforce each other. And for some reason, it doesn't work the same way on the resistance side. It seems like the resistance side, it keeps trying to pull us apart. Like if, so one way to strike debt is to fight for higher wages. The black line going up is the price of tuition. That red line that is slowly going down is income for people with 4-year degrees. So again, some of you probably know this. if minimum wage kept pace with productivity, what would minimum wage be today?
$15.
Close?
That's the ballpark.
Higher?
It'd be closer to, if it kept with productivity, it'd be closer to $22.
Bingo, $22. I just applied for a job that is $15 an hour.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not just minimum wage workers, today's minimum wage workers, who are winding up in debt for basic needs. It's a lot of us, even if we're not making minimum wage. In fact, yeah, you're right. 40% of all Americans are making less than what minimum wage was in 1968. Even if you're making median income, right, which is around $52,000 a year, that's only, when assuming a 40-hour work week, that's only $25 an hour, just slightly above what minimum wage was in 1968, adjusting for inflation. So this is why I'm saying a debt resistance movement has to be a new kind of labor movement. And we're running out of time. The last point that I would like to, I guess I'll just go super quickly. There are ways to resist these kinds of debt.
Yes.
Detroit's bankruptcy, which will soon become other cities' bankruptcies. Flint's going to go through the same thing. Chicago is going to go through the same thing. They're going to cut their pensions so that they can pay their municipal bonds. There have been really innovative tactics in Europe of citizens' debt audits, where citizens, like us, come together and review the municipal debt and review the state bonds and find out who those bondholders are, and then make their own judgments. Say, this is a legitimate debt. We should keep paying this one because this is somebody's pension. This is a promise that we all made to them, and it's a promise we should keep. And then looking at other debts and saying, actually, this is an illegitimate debt. We're just not going to pay it. One of the things that Strike Debt would like to do is create citizens' debt audits in the US. So it's a big project. It's not something we can workshop in an hour and a half. It requires getting some pretty savvy, smart people together who can get some people with some economic backgrounds to help them out. But I don't have a background in economics, but if I can work with someone over a few months' time, I can understand this stuff. And basically, just going line by line, saying we should stop paying this one and we should pay this one. We didn't touch on this, but most people don't know it. It's illegal. Debtors' prisons are illegal, yet debtors' prisons are coming back. There are 3 different ways that someone could wind up in jail without committing any crimes, but just because they can't pay a bill. One is down south. A lot of states have privatized their probation services. And these probation services don't take any tax dollars. Instead, they charge fees for the people who are on probation. If you can't pay your fee, the probation officer takes you to jail. Right? It's simply, the crime is poverty. Right? And when they go to jail, the taxpayers pay that. It would be cheaper if these counties ran their own probation services, like normal places do. The South is weird.
Well, can't they be taken to court for violating the Constitution?
Well, it's tricky. The ACLU is doing the best work on this. The ACLU is researching it and is doing exactly that. In a few places, judges have reviewed it and shut it down, but in a lot of places it's still going. Another way to do it is just a court fine. Let's say you did break the law, and the penalty is you now have a $1,000 fine. According to the U.S. Constitution and according to most state constitutions, you cannot be put in jail simply for failure to pay, inability to pay a fine. Yet that's happening in many, many places. The last way, and in some ways the craziest way, and we've got the best documentation for how this happens in Minneapolis. Every year, slightly less than 1,000 people get thrown in jail because they can't pay a credit card bill. And it's the same deal. They're the debt buyer takes them to court. They're improperly served, so they don't know they're supposed to go to court. Rather than dock their wages, they're arrested for failure to appear, which is a crime, right? they set bail at the same amount as the debt. So as soon as somebody's calling all of their friends, all of their relatives to scrape together bail, that bail is immediately forfeited to the debt collectors. Literally, the police are becoming the debt collector. That should be illegal. I think it is illegal, but it's happening. I would love for the Rolling Jubilee to buy credit card debt in Minneapolis and shine a spotlight on this. I would love for Occupy Our Homes in Minneapolis to go occupy the Hennepin County Jail and get arrested for illegally occupying the jail and be punished by being put in jail that they were occupying illegally. I mean, it's the perfect absurd way to call attention to what's going on. I want to return to your question about Iceland.
Iceland, yes.
Jubilees work. It's not just some moral claim. It's not just some, we should do this because it's the right thing to do. It's a practical solution. Iceland, as some of you might know, was the hardest hit country by the mortgage crisis. You know, all these mortgage-backed securities, toxic loans, it's like a game of musical chairs. When the music stopped, Iceland was holding more of this bad debt than anywhere else. They sunk faster than any other country in Europe. Their response was the exact opposite of the response in the US. They arrested bankers, they nationalized the banks, they bailed out the people. If you had an underwater mortgage, let's say, you know, just to keep the math simple, let's say that you have a mortgage for $300,000, but the true value of your home after the market corrected itself was only $200,000. Iceland wiped out $90,000 of that underwater mortgage. So you're still underwater, but only a manageable amount. They wiped it. So after that jubilee, that partial qualified jubilee, the most underwater you could be is 110%. What have we seen? Iceland is rebounding faster than any other country in Europe. The countries like Ireland and Latvia that are really doing the austerity really, really hard are stagnating. You know, they're recovering at the slowest pace. We could do that in the United States, except for one man. This is all the stuff we didn't talk about.
Oh my gosh.
This is the obligatory Chomsky quote.
Is it possible to get this slide like emailed to us?
Sure, yeah, I don't know if it would make any sense. Here's the other joke.
I have a cipher.
The Pentagon is the nation's banana stand. Oh, come on, I know he's in here. Ah! Ed DeMarco.
Yep.
Oh,
Ed DeMarco, unelected recess appointee by the Bush administration, manages something like 30% of the underwater mortgages in the country. He could decide today to wipe out that portion that's underwater. It would be one of the best things we could do economically in terms of like stimulus. But he believes that it would be immoral to do so. Obama has recently nominated someone to replace him. Watts, yes.
Yeah.
Who, I don't know that much about him. He's bad on some issues, but according to the housing activists, they like him for this position. I don't know if he will do, you know, the technical term for this would be a principal reduction, but it might better be called a principal correction.
that's right.
A really innovative tactic is going on right now in Cleveland, Ohio. A group called ESOP, a really great local organizing group, has actually organized a mortgage strike for people with underwater mortgages. It's very, very small and it's under the radar. These people are continuing to pay their regular mortgage monthly payments, but instead of paying it to the bank, they're paying it into an escrow account. Isn't that brilliant? There's a huge risk. These people had good credit and had never missed a payment before. As soon as they miss one payment, their credit score is going to drop 300 points. Now, they found retirees living on fixed incomes who are never going to need another loan in their life. If we could scale this up, we could potentially minimize those financial risks. One thing that we could all do, we could all support, would be to change the laws so that it becomes illegal to do a credit check for the purposes of housing or employment. There's no correlation between how good of an employee you are and your credit score. None whatsoever. It's just pure racist nonsense to use a credit score to determine employment.
In Oregon, we have got that on employment. We put in a year or so ago. And I can say in Oregon, the work that we're doing with our organizations, we're doing massive haircuts on loans in spite of DeMarco. And his whole issue on one of the reasons he's been able to get away with this is something called the arm's length agreement. We sell the property to an investor and then buy it back the same day. And to the homeowner at today's market value, we have ways we're doing this across the board in Oregon, along with other tactics to give haircuts on those loans. But he has a piece in there called the arm's length agreement. We just passed an amendment that said it's illegitimate in Oregon if a nonprofit's involved. And so we're going to be talking tomorrow about a lot of those kind of ideas at 11 o'clock in this room. But if we don't do haircuts on this stuff, we're never getting out of the hole we're in. And we've got to eliminate unsustainable debt, and we've got to do haircuts on debt that's worth keeping.
The other tactic that I'm really excited about, and some of you have probably heard of, is using eminent domain to take care of underwater mortgages. And the devil is in the details on that, but I'm not an expert, so I'll let other people who are experts.
Have you guys looked at modern monetary theory, which is the idea that a fiat currency like ours, the government create the money it needs for whatever projects it wants. The only issue, of course, is inflation. You want to watch that. But essentially, we can create the money to raise the federal debt and these personal debts if we wanted to. And what would be the impact of that on the economy?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. I'm not an expert on it. I know it's controversial among economists, but it seems to make better sense of how inflation works. I mean, the classical economists keep thinking we're going to have massive inflation any day now.
Happen.
And it's never happened. So eventually, I think you've got to rethink that. If only there was some kind of prepaid debit card that Occupy was coming out with, where they could just tweak the digits, those ones and zeros, so that all of us suddenly get new money out of nowhere.
There you go. Who knows?
Edward DeMarco gets it every single month, $40 billion a month. Feds are manufacturing and giving him to pay off all of this mortgaging debt, and he is not passing it on to Main Street. 40 billion, that's 20 Afghanistan wars every single month. They're just manufacturing the money for him.
So we're getting to our time. I'd be happy to stay and talk with anyone who wants to talk. I'd also, I'm willing to share this slideshow, but honestly, better than the slideshow is the Debt Resistors Manual. You can either go to our website and download it, or if you would like to leave me your email address, today I will email you the PDF of this. And eventually, the second edition will be available in any bookstore, like normal.
Yeah, what was that entity, New York, what?
The New Economy Project in New York, is that what you're
New Economy Project.
New Economy Project.
Yeah, they're great.
So tonight we have at 7 o'clock a convention roundtable. There'll be people from each of the conferences together speaking. Margaret Flowers is going to do the economic democracy one. And then tomorrow night at 6 p.m. we have up there the end of the big finance and creating a new economy. It's kind of a bunch of people from this economic democracy conference coming together to talk about how to remake the economy and end the finance economy. So that's tomorrow night at 6 p.m. And it's all on these flyers.
Thank you.
I'm going to take off. You can call Eric for dinner, and I'll call you when I'm done with my work.
Okay, I'll walk home and grab the book. Yes. Oh, you want to?
I mean, I really acknowledge the issue.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I can find some
Well, it does make sense to those with property, and that's what we have, it doesn't make sense to you and I. Those of us who are drowning, it makes sense to us.
Should be around the, there's definitely some downstairs and the other front. Remember the front door, there's some downstairs down there.
Right.
Smart is that here.
Right.
Just all across from the Capitol.
So what is your working schedule?
It's 9 to 9 and 7
And I'm in outside Portland, so I live in a
Yeah. I'm not sure, Margaret is coming back from the airport still, so I'm not sure where.
it's sort of just like remember some card and this is like only part of
Margaret's department.
Okay, so I'll see you later. I'll see you at the, yes, one of those.
Oh, sure, and put your city on the back and that'll.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, looking at the mind, doesn't he look evil? Just he's like a golem.
Which thing? It's at 6. That's it tomorrow right there.
okay, well, I won't be back on stay.
Well, we can catch up with you later.
Okay.
And if you're interested in learning more about our work, we'll meet you tomorrow.
Do you have an item that I saw?
Because, for all I know, he could be a spiritual soul that volunteered to play a role to wake up the people after or in ways that he
Came back and said,
exactly
it's
what he
based on the death system. He's saying it's not true.
I embrace and like experience. That's when I often start to look at my lives like the great block of
It's connected to your bank.
Right.
There are many spiritual aspects of specific original shadow.
Okay, so you put money in it, like I have $1,000 in it. And I just
It really just started this one. They have paradigms.
But you could become
Some pools of money to deal with.
It's so interesting, wasn't it?
Right now,